Hello, I'm Mark Lawson, president of the ECS Publishing Group, home to EC Schirmer, Morningstar Music Publishers, and the Galaxy Music Corporation. I'm very pleased today to be joined by Maestro Leonard Slatkin to discuss the Vaughan Williams Sea Symphony. Together with British publisher Stainer and Bell, we have just released a beautiful new edition of the Sea Symphony. This edition was made in full cooperation with the Vaughan Williams estate and is presented in a modern, accessible engraving style. It is fully compatible with the first edition, but much cleaner. A complete account of the editorial procedures will be found in the preface and critical commentary of the new edition to the full score. We now welcome Maestro Leonard Slatkin. Well, welcome and thank you for joining me for this conversation.
I'm thrilled to be here.
So I believe you've recorded all of the Vaughan Williams symphonies with the Philharmonia Orchestra from London, and you've conducted so much Vaughan Williams over your career. Given that the Sea Symphony is really his first work, how would you characterize this in relationship to his other works?
It's very different for Vaughan Williams. When you look at the other 8 symphonies, they're all purely instrumental, although there's a voice off stage in the 3rd and a female choir and voice in the 7th. But generally, he didn't write his symphonies with the idea that they would be choral. When you have anything that has a chorus and it's called a symphony, there is an obvious comparison to make. But in this case, it doesn't hold up because Vaughan Williams has really written one of the pieces that would normally fall in the sort of oratorio category in a way, but it's not a sacred piece. So it is a symphony because the formal structure follows that, but it also deviates wildly from the traditional forms because it's inhabiting the world of the English choral tradition. And that's really important. That's what this piece to me is really about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think he was kind of stretching a bit? He was so young when he wrote this, started it when he was 30. I think it took him about 8 years to write it.
Right. And it's really his first huge composition. It's gigantic. It's about 65 minutes or so. It depends on how fast or slow you take it. And again, going back to this idea of the English choral tradition, there were so many choirs at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th, and even into today. This tradition upheld. It was premiered in Leeds, I believe, in 1908, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was. And to some degree, it continues the pattern of what we would call late 19th century romanticism. Even though it's written in the 20th century, when we hear it, it doesn't quite sound like the world that was now putting forward Schoenberg or Stravinsky. And the influences here tend to be somewhat more French. There's a lot of modal writing, so that shows us the influence of Debussy and others. But the choral writing is strictly out of the Stanford and Perry playbook from the years before.
Yeah.
And it is a virtuoso work for the chorus. Choruses love singing it, they really do. But it's not easy. There's a lot going on. The soloists have intriguing roles, more so for the baritone than the soprano. Soprano only sings in the first and last one, but the baritone has this beautiful second movement, really so moving and touching, as is much of the piece. I think it's a unique work. It's hard to find another piece that's quite like this.
Well, I was going to ask you, what would you compare this to? Would you put it in the Mahler 8 category, or what
That's
else would you?
that's a fairly good comparison. It is closer to what comes later, and that's Walton's Belshazzar's Feast. Entirely different idea, but it's closer to that kind of piece. The Mahler 8 works because the chorus and soloists are present throughout, but then we turn to other works that it might be similar to. Parts of Berlioz come to mind with Romeo and Juliet, which is also called a symphony, by the way. And I think sometimes we inhabit the world of the English composers who came before. Now, the chief one who would have been the model would have been Elgar, but he hasn't written his big choral pieces yet. They're coming. But Elgar clearly is influencing here. The reference to various sea shanties and other such things are there. But Vaughan Williams is finding not just his sea legs, but his orchestral legs as well. And for a first try at writing a work like this, it's extraordinary what he did.
Yeah.
To have that kind of command over all the forces at a relatively young age is remarkable. All you have to do is listen to the first few bars when the brass start with a fanfare, and then the music stops quickly and the chorus is behold the sea, and it's we could behold it as if it was in an old palace of cinema. You can see the curtain opening and the widescreen is there and the ocean is there. He was being quite pictorial in this
It's
piece.
very cinematic, wasn't it?
Very
Yes.
cinematic, and he's going kind of against the idea of what a symphony really was. It's more towards creating a work that mirrors the text, the Walt Whitman, which is an interesting choice for a British composer to take on at that time. And he's also trying to find ways that differentiates his kind of writing from what came before. So
Mhm.
if you listen to the people I mentioned, Stanford and Perry, you can hear where the traditions come from, but right away from the beginning, we know we're in a very different world. This is not the mature Vaughan Williams yet. It's still somebody who's slightly discovering himself as a composer. It will come much closer to reality in the second symphony, but then finally, when we get to the fourth, Vaughan Williams will come into his own. The fourth is a symphony like nobody else had written before and has hallmarks that are purely and truly those of this composer.
Yeah. Well, I know you recently did this in Ireland,
Mhm.
and I know you've done this throughout your career. Did you find that your interpretation has changed much over the years?
Not too much, actually. The first time I heard it was a live performance with my mentor and person who brought me to St. Louis, Walter Susskind, who did it in St. Louis and then took it to New York with the chorus. So he was a big advocate for the work. I had not heard it before, and I just fell in love with it. I thought this was wonderful writing and something that held my attention from beginning to end. The basics of the piece to me, and I've done it sporadically. I would probably say I've performed it 8 or 9 times now. And the recent performances were indeed the very first one by the National Symphony Orchestra of Dublin in Ireland, understanding that the Irish don't particularly have a great fondness for the British here, but they chose to do it anyway. And the chorus did a terrific job. I had lovely soloists. And I would say there are some places where I'm maybe more spacious than I was, but overall, when you're dealing with a choral work, there's limited parameters because people have to take a breath once in a while.
Mhm.
So there's my job in that piece, particularly in the last one, which is very sprawling, is to make a coherent whole out of that almost half-hour long movement. And I think we succeeded. We did a good job. The audience was absolutely spellbound and breathless at the end. It just fades away and it sounds the way it's scored like a distant foghorn almost in there. And this is a remarkable ending. Here's the first symphony. You think he's going to make a big splash like he did at the opening. No, it just fades off into the
Yeah.
distance on the horizon. So no, they enjoyed it. The audience really was rapt with
That's
attention. You felt
great.
them really, really concentrated in this. So it was a wonderful experience.
Well, many of the people listening to this will be either singers or will be choral conductors who might be preparing this for a work with the orchestra. Are there any particular challenges that you think that they should be aware of, or ways that you think that you talk to someone about preparing the chorus for this work?
Interestingly enough, the choral director in Ireland had never done the piece before and really wasn't so familiar with it. So he and I had a long chat about it, and I went through different passages. And while we were doing that, I realized that the choral end here relies very much on the clarity of the text. So the first thing is let's understand the words. And Vaughan Williams does a very good job of setting them. If you're careful about really making the consonants super clean, that's good. You can decide whether or not you want to roll the R's. This piece contains my very favorite word in the English language, rondure. such a wonderful word. Need to incorporate that into my vocabulary more. But understanding the text is key to this. The technical aspect with the chorus is not so complex. He doesn't go too far out of the range, either high or low, so he stays within decent parameters. It's only taxing because it's a relatively long piece, but the chorus has a few moments that they can relax. When you finish the second movement, for example, it's only for maybe half the choral size, perhaps less, so some are seated. Then when the chorus finishes, they sit down and relax. Then they do the scherzo, which is difficult, most difficult part of the piece for singers. And then they start the first 10 minutes or so of the last movement. And then they have another chance to just sit and rest. So Vaughan Williams has given them plenty of opportunity to regroup. There are moments of respite. There's not too much unaccompanied choral singing. So for the most part, if people are listening as they're singing, they can usually stay on pitch pretty well. It is suitable for an advanced amateur chorus. It doesn't have to be a pro group. Those are the things I found
Okay.
really important in the choral writing. Maybe one other thing for anybody who's watching this who is a choral conductor, like with most pieces, the entries are one thing, but actually where a chorus stops singing is another. So you have to look carefully at where one believes you should take a breath, where you should stop. Should you stop a note where the note is written or stop after it's written? Things like that. That requires some real thought.
Mm-hmm.
Plus,
Mm-hmm.
which uh, coloring some of the choral phrases. There are a couple of places where I actually had the chorus move the music a little closer to their face so their mouths were covered, giving it a little more ethereal sound as we
Well,
went forward.
I notice in the score, there's times that he says half the chorus
Yes,
or half
or
of this.
semi-chorus.
And you could get that probably same kind of technique by doing that with the
Well, you
score.
can do that, or depending on the size of your chorus. I had about 120 of them in Dublin, and that's a good sized chorus for the piece. That's sort of what I would recommend if you can, because the scoring is on the heavy side in places.
Mhm.
I wouldn't go too much smaller than that.
Yeah.
And you need to stack the deck more in favor of the higher voices because they have the most difficult roles to sing. Another thing with this, and for me with a lot of choral works, is when you're preparing it, try to think of a unified choral sound in terms of vibrato. Just one person who has a wider vibrato or a faster one can absolutely tear apart a
Mhm.
particular phrase because that one voice stands out. You don't want that. You want them to be very much in tune with each other. There are places where no vibrato makes a lot of sense. There are
Mhm.
places where if a word ends on an M and it's soft, you just go to a humming and just and then pull the exit rather than this. Just off you go. And
Mhm.
it's really wonderful to do that, to just think of all the colors you can get.
Okay. Good. Well, this kind of leads into my next question because you've been writing books and you've just come out with your third book, which I think is it fourth book? Oh, sorry about that. I must have missed one along the way. But this new one is very intriguing because it really dives into how the conductor approaches certain pieces of music. And so I'm going to look down and get the correct title, but it's Eight Symphonic Masterworks of the 20th Century, a study guide for conductors. And I have ordered my copy, by the way.
Excellent.
But tell us a little bit about this and what you were thinking as you did this. I thought it'd be good for people to know.
So the first three books are more about me, my life, my family. First book has many pages of information about what the job of a conductor is. How do we study? How do we rehearse? What's our etiquette at concerts? What's it like being on tour recording? The second book is a lot of stories of musicians and good times that I've had and people that I've known. The third one was called Classical Crossroads, and it was really looking at the music world today and how it's different than when I entered it 55, 60 years ago, whenever it was, trying to offer some concepts that may go against a lot of today's thinking, because I think in some ways we're losing our path, but maybe we can get back on it at some point. During COVID, and I was one of the people who actually liked COVID because it gave me a chance to explore other things to do. And one of the things I did was to have Zoom sessions or video conferences with conductors, but not teaching them this, not the technical aspect of conducting, but just saying, okay, today let's work together on the Symphonie Fantastique of Berlioz or Afternoon of a Faun or La Mer, whatever it happened to be. And we could talk through the piece where I would point out, here's something that you need to know before you ever step on the podium. It might be how a divisi is done in the strings. It could be which kind of mutes the trumpets players have. Could be you need to be in 2 or in 4 here. All these things. So I just thought, this actually works without having the people right there. And I believed that I could maybe translate some of that to written text. So these 8 scores literally go from the title page right through to the end, and in some cases, bar by bar, trying to explain what the conductor needs to know. The title is slightly misleading because the book is really for musicians as well as conductors, and even those who have a little bit of ability to read a single line. You don't have to be able to read a score, but you do have to have a score in front of you. So in order to really use the book, unless you have an incredible memory, you need a copy of the book, either hard or soft cover or on the screen, and you need a copy of the score. Again, either you can have it there or you can have that on the screen. You just have to go back and forth between the two. I didn't want to have the burden of putting all the pages of the score into the book. Otherwise, that would be about 900 pages of a book. It would be horrible. So this way seemed to be the best. As we're talking, it just came out a few days ago. And already it's generated a lot of interest because there are not very many books like this. Weingartner wrote one on the Beethoven symphonies. A man named Norman Del Mar did a series of books about score study. One was on Elgar, another was on Berlioz, so forth and so on. But aside from the isolated single essay or two, there's not been much like this. This is the start of a series. I think every 8 or 9 months, another volume will come out. And I'll keep doing them as long as people are interested in this
in doing
idea, this concept.
it's
It's not
great.
meant as a shortcut, but it's meant to fill a role that might have been for a conducting teacher, but maybe not so much these days. So it's not really getting somebody in front of the orchestra, it's getting the information before you're in front of the orchestra. So you're fully prepared for what it will be like when you begin rehearsals.
Well, it sounds very interesting, and you can find it at Rowan and Littlefield, which is the publisher, or I noticed it was already on Amazon as well. So
It'll
yeah,
be all over. And you
very
can get it
fascinating.
hard. If you want to spend a lot of money, get hardback. If not, get the paperback or even the online version, which is a little
Yes.
less
Well,
expensive.
let me mention one more thing before we close, and that is that you're a wonderful composer and arranger as well, and that we are going to be publishing a suite of sonatas for wind ensemble that is based on the music of Scarlatti, and that will be coming out this fall. Just say a little bit about that before we close.
Another thing I did during pandemic time was to write some original pieces, but I've also been fascinated by transcriptions. I've kind of done many in my life. I had a set of Brahms pieces that have been played a couple times now. I did some Mendelssohn pieces, a few other things like that. One of the Brahms pieces, or maybe two of them, were just for the wind section. There were a couple for the strings and a couple where we put everybody together. And I wondered what it would be like if I could take Scarlatti and transcribe that, but just for what I call orchestral wind ensemble. So it's not the same as, say, the Persichetti Symphony or other pieces that are for band or concert band. There are no saxophones. It's only for those instruments that we'd be playing in a traditional symphony orchestra. Why Scarlatti? Well, I enjoyed the challenge of these works that are so keyboard oriented, but at the same time, I thought could be interesting virtuoso pieces. Two of them are hard with a lot of notes, but very playable, depending on the tempo you choose to take. And then the others are more lyrical. And I think they suit the winds very well. And these days, a lot of this music you don't hear very much anymore. You don't hear it on recitals, you don't hear it on the radio so often. And I thought doing something like this, giving the wind players of an orchestra a chance to show off, would be very nice on a program. So you had a program where you did a piece for the wind ensemble, you did a piece for the strings, you did a piece for percussion, then you come back on the second half and do what Bartok Concerto for Orchestra, something like that.
Mhm.
I think the premiere is actually going to be in St. Louis. I think. I know I'll do it a couple places else, but it will be on a program that will start with a work by my wife, Cindy McTee, and the first half will include with a work by my son, Daniel.
Very good.
So
Very
it's a
good.
nice family project to get this thing
Yes.
off the ground. And I think it's ideal for wind ensembles, just the kind of music they've been looking for. I'm very proud of the arrangements. Even my wife liked it, and she's tough to please.
It's good. That's good. It's important.
Yeah.
Well, we're looking forward to publishing it. So we're looking forward to making it available for folks. Well, thank you for taking time to visit about this. And we really appreciate all that you're doing and particularly all you've meant to many of us over the years. So thank you.
And thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing the final version of the Sea Symphony, see what it all comes out like. All these years of doing it and then realizing, oh, I did that wrong, but I didn't know any better. Okay.
Well, very good. Thank you very much.
Mark, thank you. Take care.